Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Jo from ATC. Very pleased to welcome you to the Unpacking the Results of the 2023 State of Talent Acquisition Survey. Now, we'd love to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of Kulin Nation, which is the land I'm dialing in from today. Our respects to elders past and present, particularly during this week, Reconciliation Week. And of course, welcome you on all the lands you're joining us from today as well. Now, we've had 230 talent teams participate to this survey, which is our largest participation yet. We've broken the findings down into 7 key areas that myself and the panelists will be running through with you today. And sounds like a good time to actually introduce you to today's panelists. We have Simon, Senior Manager at Slalom. We've got Sue House, of course, Talent Strategist at the Human Collaborative. And we have Eleanor, Head of Strategic Solutions, joining us all the way from Arizona. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Now, a reminder to the panelists that if you're going to jump in, take yourself off mute, of course. Although we are several years into Zoom, are we still all finding that this is the case? Occasionally we have to say, sorry, you're on mute. Now, we're going to jump straight into it and talk about performance and delivery. Now, first of all, before we do that, actually, let's just check in with the audience. Who here, maybe you can tell us in the, in the chat and the comments, who actually contributed to the survey. Maybe you can give us a thumbs up emoji or a yes. Tebow, you've raised your hand. Hi, Tebow, good to see you here. And then, of course, some others are, dialing in, obviously, to see us spill the tea, because we always have some juicy quotes in our State of TA survey as well. Now, performance and delivery. We've got 3 key factors here now. Now, Simon, I might call on you first. You are currently an internal TA leader. Our ability to deliver the right talent at the right time is still a 7.2. Now, this has not changed since 2021. What do you think that is a symptom of?
Well, I think, Jo, that the challenges continue to evolve. So I don't think it's necessarily been one thing or the same thing over the last 18 months since the last survey was produced. But I think the primary piece, the reason that where a lot of us aren't being able to change the needle or move the needle, is because we're still stuck in the weeds of day-to-day recruitment, still operating in that, let's say, functional or service-based model. Obviously, the 7.2 means there are some of us that are operating better than others in this space, but I think it highlights that there is room to change and opportunity for all of us to find ways of changing the way in which we operate and the way that we're valued within the business.
Yeah, and our, pipelines are opening up just slightly, but not terrifically. And this next one, the strength of the talent strategy, I mean, that hasn't really changed too much. But Sue, what I found interesting was that we're rating the strength of the talent strategy to be 6 out of 10, but only 18% of talent functions that we surveyed actually said, yep, we have somebody in our team that we believe is dedicated to talent strategy.
Yeah, not a surprise, Jo. I think one of the areas of focus for most talent teams needs to be how do they get a greater connection and understanding of not only the talent, like design the talent strategy, but what is the business strategy that they're needing to ensure the talent is going to fulfill against. So if you take that talent strategy linkage up to the business strategy, there's still quite a bit that we can be doing to ensure that we're focusing on that with the business.
Yeah, and, I'd really see this as being that, foundation level, document, that foundation plan that's going to set people up for success. So, whether it's not existent or whether it's just happens to be not delivering, that's obviously something that that needs to be considered. And then one of the really interesting things that we looked at was, what is the delivery between organizations where talent acquisition and talent management are connected, they're together and they're cooperative, versus those that operate separately in isolation to talent management. And, you can see that there is, some changes in the results here. I mean, 2022, the talent topic of the year was really internal mobility. It's very difficult to do if talent acquisition and talent management aren't operating together. But Simon, I'm going to throw to you because I guess, you could call it controversially given this slide. You actually operate within the business. You're not within sort of core HR. Can you kind of talk about, the structure of talent at Slalom?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are our own function. We report directly into the managing director of our marketplace, but then the team is then broken up and each talent acquisition professional sits within each unit of the business and operates within that leadership team, advising from talent strategy all the way through to execution and covering all aspects around obviously interview training through to diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives as well. So it allows us to, really have, I think, generate much closer relationships with the business. And then we have better visibility over those business units and we can talk to things like internal mobility and understand when we should go to market versus when we need to be looking internally, which also then reduces our need to go to market, I think, which allows us to then pipeline and have better efficiency around where we're working and where we're focusing our time.
So you would consider yourself to really have, talent acquisition and talent management aspects together, that end-to-end piece, but in the business, and then you just link out to certain HR elements. Like I know job architecture was one of the things that you kind of linked out to separately. How does talent management kind of straddle across those two areas?
So talent management is still something that I think we need to be much better at here at Slalom. I think there still is a call for a dedicated team and professionals within the business to do that. At the moment, it's ad hoc work done between my team, the business unit leadership team and the HR team, depending on who has capacity. So it's still not being done as well as it could be or should be in that regard, but we're lucky that we're small enough that we can still sort of manage day to day, but it's not ideal.
Yeah. Well, it'll be certainly very interesting, as we move closer to talent advisory, as more people start adopting internal mobility, as we look at the results of connected versus separate, how talent functions continue to adapt and grow. So are you seeing changes in that space yourself?
Yeah, definitely, Jo. I think it's no surprise that when talent acquisition and talent management are connected, as we can see on the screen here, the outcomes are better, right? The art of mobility is not just about people moving into new roles or being promoted or career progression. It's actually also about skills acquisition and access to different environments for development and learning. So unless you've got visibility across your current workforce and what you need to look at externally in the market, I don't think you can effectively look at how to grow your own capability internally the right way. And I do see a greater move towards talent functions straddling both of these that we see, and it's pleasing to see and good to see, where that's going to take things from where we're going to be in another year from now.
That's right. Well, certainly we, I think this state of TA survey and reports here to stay and will only continue to keep evolving. Now, we love to have some fairly juicy comments as part of this, and we purposely de-identify the talent leaders. These are from talent leaders who actually contributed to the survey. But we tend to find whenever we say who people are and where they're from, PR and comms water the commentary down so much that it's not quite as useful or even entertaining. But certainly we can see here, strategic people planning. So that talent strategy sits with HR, but they're at capacity. So, the commentary here was it's kind of, it's on the cards, there's business intent, but that never sort of seems to be prioritized. And then of course that disconnect that you were talking about earlier. So, from there's corporate strategy within the business, and then there's HR-led initiatives, and, there's no alignment there. And of course, we talked about this at length at the Talent Advisory Conference, HRBPs and that connection to talent, or the creation of TABPs. But in this particular organisation, HRBPs were, the biggest blockers. So there's certainly a lot of different, experiences happening out there.
Joe, there's a couple of comments that might be just worth highlighting if you just flick back a slide there. So Paula Hilby, sorry, I've got my glasses on, but they can't see everything. And Dan Neuro just commented as well around the need to have TA as a seat at the table. Ironically, we used to say that about HR and people teams, 3, 5, 10 years ago. So there is a pathway. We've ridden it before, so we just need to ride hard from a TA perspective as well to join up that HR function and to get a seat at that table too. Just addressing those comments for you, Joe. You probably can't see them as you're facilitating.
Thank you so much. And look, I think that leads nicely into our next section here, where we're going to talk about funding and executive support. So what we found in the survey is a total of 53% of talent teams felt like they were well funded. 4% of them reported abundant funding. Now, this is down from 11 or 12% in 2021, which I think that was a time a lot of people kind of opened the war chest and said, we need to go for broke. That was the period of salary wars and no one coming into the country, no new skills coming in. People just starting to explore the concept of offshore hiring as well. So we're throwing everything at it, but that's certainly come down significantly. But 47% of teams, reporting that they're underfunded. And, one of the things I wanted to look at was, is it a company size issue? Is it a case of, the smaller startups kind of being, funded and throwing a lot at it? Or is it a case of, the large corporate enterprises? But, we didn't really find any direct correlation. The only kind of outlier here was that of those underfunded, the ones that fared the worst were between 5,001 to 10,000 employees. So the level of importance at the talent function at executive level, again, we've got some changes here. So, inadequate is 7% this time around. It was 13 last time. We're seeing some changes here. Yet the interesting thing is, 63% of people reported that, yes, there's significant level of importance placed upon people and talent by the executive team, but only 53% provided adequate funding. So there's still that, disconnection there as well. And then we looked at, what does abundant funding buy you? Are you faring any better just because of this abundance? And, we can see here that, yeah, there are significant gains to be made. So from the effectiveness of your organization's talent strategy, a 7.9 to a 4.2. Sue, is money talking here? What is this potentially telling us?
Oh, I think, the ability for talent functions to carve out the right business cases for funding and cost investment is changing. I see a lot of different ways that businesses are actually funding their future, from chargeback models into the business, corporate funding, business case, transformation roadmaps, and so on. But the severely underfunded, if they can't demonstrate there's a talent strategy, it's very hard to put a case to the table for the future. So if you tie those two things together, I think it's a pretty neat case. It's just, how do you build that? And I know that, ATC, you've done a lot of work in the past with your conferences and events on how to engage with C-suite and how to build that effective business case as well. So it's so critical that is joined up, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and I should say that the report that we are releasing later this week is very lengthy. Not only does it include a lot more data points than we're sharing with you today, but we've also taken a lot of time to put together a lot of recommendations. So, when it comes out later this week, have a solid read of the report, because we've taken the time to go through and say, how do you gain executive report, and how do you manage how many requisitions a recruiter should, carry those kind of things as well. Now, Simon, from your perspective, you have a lot of executive support, and that's why you are, embedded in the business. That's why you've made that kind of gain. For you, it's all about growth, right? So can you kind of, give us a little understanding about, like how you're actually, managing your talent strategy, what that key component is?
Yeah, I think the way that we see talent acquisition within Slalom is around it being a key driver of growth, or a strategic growth driver, similar to that of our sales team. So when we launch new markets and we are continuing to grow our business globally, it is really around hiring and acquiring a great sales team, as well as a strong talent acquisition team, in order to basically meet the supply and demand, and as best as we can balance the two as we grow. Obviously, the sales team are important for bringing in clients and great projects and opportunities, and then talent acquisition team building out those teams and practices as per the skills matrix that we want to create, and trying to not get too ahead of the curve and having too many people before need, but also not having too much need and being reactive. So,
because you rated your ability to deliver very high, but you also have approval, between hiring early based on the projection that the sales team is going to sign a new contract and that'll require talent. You guys are choosing to hire based on the projection, not the outcome, and potentially have underutilization, have people sitting on the bench, versus waiting, and then there's this gap between how long will it take us to actually obtain that talent, right? So is that's something that does the business just wear the cost of the extra salary? Is that working in terms of growth strategy?
It's built into the forecast and the revenue growth plan of the year. So in order to hit our revenue targets, we have to hit utilization targets, which is getting people on projects. And in order to hit those utilization targets, we have to hit our headcount hiring plans to have the people in order to work for our clients. So it's all connected and tied in together, but the budget for the year is built with that kind of, I suppose, risk appetite in place. Obviously, we don't want somebody joining the business and sitting on the bench for 3 months. That very rarely happens, if ever. It's about taking a calculated risk and hiring the team and the skills and capabilities that we know we're going to take to market. That's part of our unique business offering. And then the pressure goes back to the sales team or our wonderful go-to-market team to then go and get those people busy and working with wonderful clients.
Can I just add something to that, what I just heard? Simon, you did not talk about talent acquisition for more than 10% of that dialogue just then. It was all about business strategy, right? So the fact that you and your team can understand and articulate the business drivers, the growth strategy, the roadmap for revenue, the metrics, the productivity, that's the key to servicing and partnering with the business to fulfill. And I think if we can take away from that one little dialogue that you had then, that if as talent advisors and talent experts in our organizations, that's the key to really understand that, because then you can do the right work with the business. And
Eleanor, you have recently spoken at HR Tech Asia, and you were speaking on the topic of, funding, revenue, etc. Do you want to share a little bit about that story with us?
Sure. And it is one of those moments where we're tied into each other, right? I'm leaning in and I'm just like, yes, Simon, that's great. Everyone's at the table, and Sue and Paula, even in the chat, it is about having the right people at the table to contribute, because from a TA perspective, our passion lies in finding the right people to fulfill the right role. And we're driven by this purpose to pursue the strategy, right, of our business partners that we're like not allegiant to, but at the same time partnering with. And the true partnership here is, kind of goes to the wayside. I mean, talk about being a little bit spicy and a little saucy with like the tea, right? When economy turns, what happens first? Recruiters and TA team seems to be the most vulnerable, right? Because we're hiring less and we're going to do this. So the concept around this is, let's not be seen as a cost center. We are talent advisories. We are here to help with the strategy. So how do we how do we circumvent that by creating the business case and showing that not having the right people costs the business, and having the right people trained up within the organization, right, is actually the driver of the revenue, that we will come out of this because we're creating that business case, because we're listening as talent advisors, we're contributing with our passion, our expertise, and then we're connecting the dots across all parties. And that's really the case, is that when you don't have the right people working the right hours and the right jobs, you're going to have an underperforming team, whether it's in a quick serve restaurant or whether it's on a software development team where they're pumping out more hours than they should be, right? I always say there's a little saying where it's just like, you have grumpy code and grumpy designers, you're going to have right, grumpy software. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing with anything from a service orientation. And so how do we join together and really be a little bit more effective, whether it's finding the right people in the right time for sure, but not sacrificing our TA teams in order to meet a number, right, to be fiscally prudent. And that's, talk about leaning in and finding the passion. That's the report, right? Like, how can we do that more effectively?
That's right. And we do have a section coming up around job security, workload and wellness a little bit later, but it absolutely doesn't make sense. Those people that need to be so passionate about bringing, top critical talent into the business, it doesn't make a lot of sense to, have those people really despondent, right? So moving along to the next section now. Oh, we've got some quotes here actually. So we've got here, I've got adequate budget for technology, but not enough for headcount. So my TABPs are handling 55 to 65 requisitions each, when for the complexity level of the roles and obviously the market, they should be handling 20. And somebody here that has listed their budget as abundant, but that was for technology projects transformation only, not actual TA headcount, feeling like they are doing the work of 3 people, which is not sustainable. So it's interesting the way that budgets have been seen and how they're broken up. I know that I had one talent team say to me, Jo, I have no budget for tickets to come along to the big ATC event, but I have lots for advertising. So I'm wondering, if we happen to spend exactly the same amount with you on advertising of some kind, maybe there's a free ticket package in there. And I really like the way that you're thinking here. It's when budgets don't work for us, we tend to get a little bit creative, or dare I say devious, don't we? And then this one here, very interesting. I mean, we were having a good chat about this yesterday when we all caught up, but as a TA leader, you have to be willing to take a grenade for your team. If your budget gets cut, your deliverables must reduce. So I wonder how often we're having that conversation around, okay, well, if people are being cut or budget's being cut, we obviously don't plan to deliver the same as we did with more resources. Now, moving into hiring experience. So, Eleanor, we've got here, and you're a real expert in this area, when we combined the satisfaction ratings of high satisfaction and somewhat satisfied, the results here, weren't too bad, but at the bottom, we've got 66%. So this was the lowest performing, was around speed of the hiring process, which I would think with obviously all the automation and tech out there, we'd be performing much higher in this area.
Yeah, and I think we were talking a little bit about that as far as being a part of the strategy and plan. And when it comes to, the transformation, where you start to introduce automation on top of existing ATS systems. I know we have a section on that a little bit further, but it is a win when 2 things happen, right? One, you've listened to your TA teams, your recruiters, those in the front lines in the field, right? Also experiencing the automation, the number one feeling like that is felt. They can tell in their everyday scheduling, right? Being able to auto schedule, being able to improve that experience, and then communicate the reminders and do all the things that they have on their checklist, right? Which is, I want to send them interview prep. I want to send them a reminder. I want to make sure that they're prepared and ready. When that experience happens for both the recruiter on behalf and to the candidate, and then also happens to the hiring manager, then you have this win,
Yeah.
right? Then you have this win because everyone's covered, the candidate, the
Right.
recruiter, and then the hiring manager. But when all of that is missing,
Mm.
then of course, right? Then, or one of those things are missing, then it doesn't feel effective. It doesn't feel like an effective transition or transformation, or it feels like there's something that was left out or maybe missed. And so then that adds to the
This
change.
bottom number really is a leverage point, right? This has the ability
Mhm.
to impact, candidates obviously don't want to wait around for weeks and weeks and weeks and have this lengthy
No.
process. I mean, not everybody is jumping from one gainful position to another. Some people are actually unemployed, they're in the market, they haven't got income coming in, and they want this to be as quick as possible. They want it, to be as easy as possible. So, by
Mhm.
looking at that bottom point, I can see that those top ones would, automatically,
Be satisfied.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And so we've got here that respondents were least satisfied with the cost and speed to hire, yet they impact others, which we just talked about. So that really moves us into, technology. So when we ask people about the type of tech that they're using, 48 applicant tracking systems were used. I mean, that's a large number when you think about, those first few ATSs coming out way back when, we're now here in a position where there are 48 being used across those teams. 5.9 satisfaction rating out of 10, isn't telling such a fabulous story. We've listed here the most used systems. And interestingly, of the 48, the 10th most common response was that no ATS is being utilized, which is, I should add though, we did have quite a big spread. We had a lot of large enterprise organizations, but we did have a lot of startup scale-ups and in between responding to the survey as well. But obviously, what we have now is this new generation of ATS. We've got this generational leap happening where applicant tracking systems are conversational, they're 24/7, they're multilingual. So this will be a really interesting space for us here in Australia. Eleanor, it's been happening for a little bit longer in the US. So, what are you, and obviously you have many more systems over there as well, and many more talent functions. But given that the Paradox ATS is very new to Australia, what can we expect to see here that, maybe, the US has already, had time to kind of embed this new generation?
I think a benefit of being introduced to the conversational ATS now is, right, because we've had it for about 6 or 7 years. We've learned so much from the impact of the conversation, the timing of communications, the level of automation that might be too little, too much, and then finding that just right. And then understanding that the configuration, although best practice and recommendation is number one, having the ability to customize and having the ability to kind of make more bespoke processes depending on the hiring profile that you're looking for. So some things can be automated, right, all the way through, and some things still need that, additional touch and concierge service. So that complexity, but being able to make it into a simple user interface for both the candidate, the hiring manager, and the recruiter was the game-changing part of it. Is that the center of it is conversational, right? Being able to text an application, being able to confirm or reschedule or cancel interviews or meetings with a simple text message, and then receiving all of that where you are as a candidate, and then also where you are as a hiring manager. Maybe you're not at your desk all the time, and you're floating around different locations, but being able to receive everything and communicate changes. I think that visibility and communication layers has been key. So that's really what the current state is here, and then also the future of what we're continuing to build and refine.
Joe, there's a question in the chat from Dan asking about how others would choose their ATS. I'm just going to throw perhaps to Sue, because we were talking about this yesterday, but perhaps it's less about what ATS you choose and more about how you implemented, how you set up the change, and Sue, I'll let you take that. I know you're very passionate in this space.
I think this leads
Yeah.
nicely to this next slide here, Sue.
I'm very passionate about that, Simon. Thank you for remembering that discussion. You're right. I mean, there are a myriad of options that organisations consider. It really comes down to how do you understand your business requirements, and then what's your tech ecosystem and your future roadmap are the fundamentals. But it's really then, upon making that selection, engaging the business, configuring the right way, but not setting and forgetting. The reason I'm so passionate about, I'm not a tech expert, but I'm a talent expert working with talent teams that don't know how to continue to develop and evolve their tech configuration and workflows, and partner with work effectively with their tech partners to do that the right way, to keep on top of what their roadmap's doing, how you can incorporate that into the future. There's a lack of, I think, commitment and potentially time and expertise in talent teams to partner effectively with our tech providers. And I think there's accountability and responsibility for the tech providers to really bring their future thinking to the table and use the groundswell of knowledge and desire from the talent teams to inform the future roadmap. It's a real team sport, this one. And I think, the more that we can bring those together on a consistent basis, the more the outcomes are going to be beneficial for all.
And look, a lot of what I'm seeing in the chat and what I hear from people consistently is like, we were cut out of the discussion, we're cut out of the decision. But if we come back to talent acquisition, talent management, HR working together, more cooperatively, then, I guess that we're closer to those conversations because we're kind of not siloed out. Simon, I know that, you yourself, you've kind of got the, people overseas somewhere making the decision, we're just never really in the room together. And also, people who chose the former system are still within the business and kind of hold tight to, the decision that they made as well, right?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one. I think it's not an uncommon problem, as we can see in the chat thread. At the end of the day, I think I've never met a recruiter who loves their ATS yet. And that's anecdotal evidence, sure. But I made a decision about 18 months ago with what we were doing that this is the ATS we have right now. Sure, it's not perfect. How can we, to Sue's point, better understand the system, educate ourselves, understand how we can leverage it to its maximum potential to do as much as we possibly need right now. And when leaning into it in that way and just going, well, let's kind of make it our best friend until we can have a discussion about a new piece. Let's do that. And I think that then leads me to previous experience as well with other ATSs. It's really about change management. I think we need to really push on our technology providers and wonderful partners like Paradox. That change management piece is so crucial. Training, education, setting up the system. You can have the theoretically best ATS on the market, but if you don't set it up correctly, you don't train your team on how to use it, train the business on how to use it, and actually go through a proper change management process, it's kind of all for naught, and it'll end up becoming as much of a hassle as the previous one.
Can I just say one more thing here? I'm very passionate, and I'll let you move on. But insights and analytics informs how optimized you're using your ATS or your recruitment platform. Yeah. So if you're not measuring the outputs and the outcomes and the quality of performance and experience, all the things you've just articulated, it's very difficult to inform change. Yes, adoption and implementation is absolutely critical in getting that right, but the feedback loop is absolutely critical to make sure that you're doing great work on a consistent basis. I had a client recently say to me, "Hey, I've got X in. We're thinking of ditching it because of X, Y, and Z." I said, "Well, that's not a wise move. You've just put it in. It's been in 18 months. Let's make it work for you. Do it, that way." So
yeah, and look, we see this from the results as well, is that the same system can be rated a 9 or a 10 out of 10 by one talent function and rated as a 1 or a 2, unusable, unsuitable by another. It's the same system, and part of it does come down to how are we implementing, how are we configuring, how are we optimizing, but it's also fit for purpose. It's not just sort of social proofing, taking our friend's word for it to say, oh, it really works at Slalom, so it must work for me. I mean, really it's about looking at, the new generation coming through, is it the conversational 24/7 kind of system that you're looking for? Is it that, no, we need the big end-to-end all the way through system? Is it something highly configurable? Integration's the most important thing for us. I mean, we've got to really get around what our exact needs are and how it's going to be utilized, so that we can kind of build into, right, am I looking for this kind, or am I looking for this kind? Because we can definitely see from the results that just because it really, really works in one organization does not mean it's going to work for another. Now, 38%, only 38% of talent teams believe they have the appropriate technology and tools to support their talent strategy. I mean, this is really low. I mean, technology is being widely available and out there and adopted. Is this just a case of, like you were saying earlier, so people kind of make their mistakes and live and learn for the next time?
This is a disturbing number, I think, for us all, to be honest. When we think about the need to demonstrate talent advisory and the ability for talent teams to become more effective and automate and create a greater user experience. I think if there's one area that I think as a cohort of experts in our industry, we need to become more capable at understanding how to position technology as an enabler, not as the silver bullet to everything, but is an enabler that we need to understand better in order that we can fulfill the strategy. And I think, maybe I'll pass to Eleanor on this one because of the work that you do more specifically, but that to me is a call out for this group. I would suggest not just these ones talking, but everyone, all the names on the attendees.
Yeah, all across. And thanks for that. And also I'll follow up with Gerardo or on the chat too, when the question was, what is stopping users from partnering and asking tech vendors for training and enablement, right? And I think one of the things that we found, I lead the strategic solutions team right at Paradox. And what that means is we partner with the business, the technology, and we understand what the objectives are to prioritize that and develop the solution around the people process, right, piece of it. And sometimes it is a full automated solution, filled with communications that are available 24/7. And other times we're augmenting an existing system, right? That you've invested, you've committed. And so now this is just another layer on top to make some part of it easier for the short term. And then you have a midterm and long-term plan. But that solution is so important to have the heads of TA, the business SMEs and their experience, and then the tech teams, because where does the data go and how does it flow? And compliance and our legal friends are really important in this process, because we can automate as much as we want, but we have to be legal and compliant throughout the way. The other portion of this is change and training. And a lot of times I think what happens is you don't have the people because they've been cut or they've been repurposed for another project, or there's not the resources. And so on some vendor sides, they can augment that, right? But they have to ask. And sometimes that question isn't being asked until the end of the project, where it's, a lot of things were not considered. So we try to include that as part of the strategy, because change and training, a beautiful product can sit on a shelf, and without adoption and comfort and confidence and trust, it won't be used, right? So that's a key part for sure.
And look, in all of the different talent, communities and threads and, online groups that I'm involved in, quite often it's a case of, which one and how much. And it's very much a price discussion straight away. What can we afford? And I think when we go in with that approach, we're really doing, ourselves and the talent function a massive disservice. And, when we start to kind of nail technology companies down on, price further and further and further, we have to understand that at some point, something's got to give, and potentially that's the service and the partnership. I mean, that responsiveness and the service and the partnership, that would be the one thing I'm social proofing big time, because that's the thing that potentially could be, you know, consistent, reliable, you know, from organisation to organisation. Now, moving into the next one, the gender pay gap, one of my favourite topics. And as we, you know, ask people, you know, do you have robust remuneration practices that ensure all people are paid fairly and equitably? Some, you know, fabulous ratings here, 7 out of 10, you know, is quite solid. But then, you know, I did set a little bit of a trap. Sorry, everyone. But I then said, you know, myself and my leaders know our gender pay gap without looking it up. And then there was a very big shift. 62% of people said no, actually. Despite our claims of robust remuneration practices and fairness and equity for everyone, I actually can't even tell you what our gender pay gap is. So, you know, that for me was a real disconnect. And we looked at, you know, what is it that moves the needle? You know, does funding, you know, move the needle? And we saw here that, yes, you know, compared to severely underfunded to abundant funding teams, you know, a 5.8 moves up to a 7.1. And then we looked at talent acquisition and talent management, cooperation and transparency. And once again, we saw that shift from being a separate TA function from a 6.8 up to a connected with talent management up to a 7.2. And again, we have a very interesting quote here. Even as global head of TA, I don't have access to our gender pay gap. So I'm all for the new transparency legislation, as Roma benefits who have the data will have to show it. Now, isn't that so telling? You know, you can reach global head of TA and still not have any transparency around something that talent acquisition clearly has an impact every time they hire someone, you know, on the gender and diverse pay gap. And then we looked at moving the needle with job architecture. And, you know, what we heard from people is to say that there's no way we'd even know what the true gap is, because the compensation framework aligns to the competency framework, and that's not complete or up-to-date data. So, you know, we have a massive project here. Now, Simon, I don't mind calling you out here. You are the second, you know, more positive quote to say, yes, you know, we map it all. We've got our architecture. The work has been invaluable. Do you want to share a little bit with us about your job architecture competency framework, you know, how that fits in with then your rem and benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jo. I think, look, I will admit we're very fortunate and very lucky to have, you know, fantastic partners in our people team who over the last 3 years have pulled this together across both our consulting professionals and our internal roles. But everything is mapped to 4 core competencies, and then how those competencies show up for each of the different streams and each of the different job tracks within those streams. What that then creates, though, is a really simplistic and repetitive framework that we can then talk to, both in terms of how we train our interviewers in what to focus on, how we then talk about feedback, capture feedback, and then discuss feedback in relation to a candidate and where they map on our framework. And then it also then feeds into performance development and promotion conversations as well. The same framework, the same competencies are then used in how someone is tracking against their role as per their competencies and how that's showing up. And that covers a variety of activities. But it means that the focus of the conversation is purely on competencies, skills, and capabilities, and ideally avoiding all of the typical bias topics. Now, we're not perfect. We have the system. It's probably working most of the time. There is still, you know, gaps and education that is required. As I think someone mentioned in the chat with training and development, it's an ongoing piece that we're constantly trying to keep people aligned to. So it's not a perfect system, but it certainly helps a lot, and it creates a much needed framework, and it gives us the answers that we need when people are starting to stray away and comparing to, you know, other individuals and all of the typical bad traits that we see when it comes to leveling people in an organization.
And in the post-survey interview that we did, you were really giving big props to the 2 people in HR who really took on this massive project. And it took them a couple of years. You know, they started with one particular area and then, you know, moved it across the business. So it's quite a big project, but you're very complimentary of their work, which is lovely to hear the good connections between talent and HR. Sue?
Yeah, I was just typing in the comment, but I decided to talk instead. I think that some businesses, even not necessarily extremely large ones, often find this notion or this plan to do job architecture or skills inventory quite insurmountable. It's like, where do we start? How big is this beast we're trying to slay? My feedback to businesses that I work with and clients is start in the areas where you think you have the biggest problem or can make the biggest impact. Problem being, if we know that we've got disparity, that is an issue. We need to focus on that and we need to target that specifically. And then also, if you can make an impact from a business perspective or to go to market and to know that you need to rejig that, rather than try and slay the beast, carve it out and, you know, how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time, I would suggest. Yeah.
Lovely. And it might be a good time to check in with everyone online to say, you know, there are new gender pay gap legislation, you know, there's new requirements coming out, you know, is there discussion, planning, changes happening within your talent functions around this? You know, do you believe that your business leaders are prepared for this level of public transparency? So if you want to share with us, feel free to share with us in the chat. And in the meantime, you know, we'll move into workload and wellness. So, you know, we asked our respondents, you know, what their current energy levels were. And I was really surprised to find 5.5 out of 10. Now, this is actually down from 2021. 2021, we were still like having lockdowns. You know, there was a lot of exhaustion. There were salary wars going on that, you know, people were saying it's not a talent pool, it's a talent puddle. You know, the cupboard is bare. People were working around the clock. TA had been significantly reduced in 2020. It bounced back and they were really struggling even to recruit for their own team. So to see our energy levels are actually diminished from where we were at that point in time, that was, you know, so big, so iconic, and so changing for all of us. I was really surprised. And then I compared it to my own energy levels and went, maybe I'm not so surprised, you know, after all. And the next thing that we asked them as well here is, actually, before we move on to job security, I'll just share with you, this is really interesting. So, you know, and maybe not so surprisingly, but, you know, how do you feel about your current workload? And, you know, how do we feel about your energy levels? And obviously, you know, very, very clear downward trend there that we're seeing. So in the report, we do talk a lot about workloads. We talk about that requisition load and the different variables you should consider before setting a rec load or to review your rec load. And, you know, again, you know, another very sobering comment here from someone to say the amount of hours I'm doing outside of regular hours is obscene. I'm giving from an empty tank. I mean, we can only do that for so long. When we ask people what teams need, it's very interesting, you know, it's, you know, there's a feeling out there that, you know, particularly the last few years, it's all about the cash. Salary came in at number 3. You know, they wanted, and just to be clear, you know, we're not kind of aiming for a 100% spread here because we did ask people to choose the top 3 responses. So better strategy and planning was number 1, followed very closely by more resources or a reduction in workload. Number 3 came in at salary. And then now let's move to job security. Now, I have resurveyed this just in the last few days on LinkedIn because back in March, I felt like we were quite optimistic. You know, there was a level of optimism in the air, 7.2 out of 10. I have seen that change. You know, I was restricted with LinkedIn by the number of kind of options that you can choose there, but you can see the split is quite differently. is quite different now. And, you know, we've got a quote here to say it's been really hard to watch TA teams who kept companies going during COVID now facing reductions and lack of support. We're not immune to the market when TA is used in an unstrategic, one-dimensional way. You know, another conversation I had with somebody was to say, I was right up there on my optimism. I, you know, rated myself as like a 10 out of 10. The reason I did that is because 6 weeks before my role got made redundant, they were having key conversations with me. They offered me more salary and equity in the business and threw everything at me to get me to, you know, stay on, of which I, you know, gladly accepted, only for 6 weeks later, my role to be made redundant. So I could not have been more shocked. So I think it's, you know, a very interesting time. And I don't think, sadly, we've seen the last of, you know, reductions in this area. So from a strategy perspective, I mean, how do all of these layoffs and role redundancies fit with this? I mean, we haven't seen any sort of big gains in strategy or delivery in the last 18 months since the last survey. Obviously, there's this short-term need, you know, this responsiveness to the market, but also long-term, we've got some pretty big projects and, you know, strategic moves to make, you know, as we progress talent forward. Does this make sense?
Yeah, completely. I was just writing in the chat then as you're speaking, Jo, that it's another indicator as to why the connectedness between talent acquisition and talent management is really critical. So as we're continuing to evolve the capabilities and the expertise in the talent functions in businesses, as advisors, you can shift focus and consistently balance between your internal skills and capability and the external market that you need to still bring and attract people to your organization. So that fundamentally means that you've got the ability to transcend, you know, across both, right? So firstly that. Secondly, no one, you know, redundancies don't generally just carve out one area of the business. You'd hope that if there's changes or right sizing in businesses, that needs to be across the board, and that will always be the case. But I'm seeing it less, right? That I have clients at the moment that we're actually genuinely working on a progressive multi-year, 3-year talent strategy. Yeah. And it's not org design and it's not roles, it's actually skills of the future and migrating skills from today, 12 and 18 months down the track as they automate. And that has to be a balance between what is the skills and capacity I have in my talent team and to right size and change and move roles if needed. But I am genuinely seeing now a little bit more towards a longer horizon because the days of spill and fill, I think, are kind of hopefully in the past to its largest extent, notwithstanding that we're seeing some significant numbers of, you know, organisations having to reduce headcount across the globe. But it's definitely a shift, Jo. And I don't know if others have got a comment there, Simon or Eleanor, if you're seeing that from your perspective.
Well, Eleanor, I wanted to ask you about, you know, the burnout rate that we're looking at. You know, clearly automation has to be key in resolving some of these repetitive tasks for people.
It is for sure, right? I mean, to Sue's point, and also the comments in the chat, it's and Jo, your story in and of itself, we're being asked from a strategic level. So I'll speak to it on both, you know, in the short term and then the longer term strategies. But the overall strategy is something flexible, right? Not tech to replace necessarily, but in this time, it might be we're working with leaner teams. So we can't have our lean teams working double the hours, right? So how can we be smart with the efficacy of the automation and the tools to them so that they have an assistant to work, you know, on the evenings, on the weekends, to be available and still have the nurturing for their candidates, but not at the rate of sacrificing themselves, right? Like still show your love, still show your care, but have your assistant automate those messages with that heart and soul that is you.
Well,
and then
connectedness, Eleanor, of what you're saying back to candidate experience, because you can see people striving to make really big gains in candidate experience, but as people get cut, teams get cut, people are overworked, people are tired, you know, what is going to happen to that recruiter experience, hiring manager experience, candidate experience? when, you know, we're relying on, you know, I guess, less automated, you know, processes there as well. You know, we're not alleviating people for the human element. I think all of this has this really strong level of interconnectedness, and we could easily, you know, 12 to 18 months now see, you know, that not just delivery, but the experience side of things diminish if we're not careful with what we're seeing here. Now,
And it's one we don't want to sacrifice, because then, right, then
Yeah.
it's not a short-term strategy. It becomes a long-term impact to everyone regarding, right? It's every C, not just the CHRO. It's the CFO, the CRO, the CSO, and everything in between, right?
so, you know, given what we're talking about here, and this is our last section, so we're very close to wrapping up now. It'll be interesting to see, you know, are these the things that are top of mind and on the top priority list for talent teams? And here's what they told us. And, you know, we've got attracting more of the right applicants, we've got diversity and inclusion, building the talent pipeline, employer brand, EVP, recruitment, marketing. Those top 4 things are all really top of the funnel elements here, right? And then when we look down here, improving tech that supports a TA process, you know, it's right down the bottom. Yet, you know, as we've been talking about today, obviously such an enabler of so many things. And then when we move over here, you know, I guess the wish list, you know, what 3 capabilities do you wish you had more access to? So not what we have been approved to focus on, but what my own, you know, ideal is. Here we go. Data analytics, 43%. You know, applicant screening and assessment, workflow automation, better integration. So there's this real disconnect. You know, it's very clear that the people responding to the report agree with exactly what you have been saying. Yet the focus areas of what we're approved to focus on, there's this really big disconnect there. So data and analytics is at the top at 43%. I mean, if we have the data, you know, do you feel like talent leaders actually have a level of preparedness or a level of expertise in actually how to analyze and utilize that data? Where are we on that maturity journey?
Not to offend anyone on the call, I think we're sitting pretty average as a profession. I've seen some of my clients with probably multiple systems due to acquisitions, different ways of working, still be able to extract data, throw it through a BI, and actually make sense of it and look at the life cycle of the employee. So let's not think that we need the world's best tech and systems to get analytics, right? I want to see the growth of capability in the right tech ecosystems to automate and to underpin what we do in our profession. But don't wait. The data will be out there. I think so. There is a need for talent leaders and senior executives within organisations to acknowledge that we can go get it and we can do great analysis and provide insights. That then ironically not only informs the strategy, but feeds a business case for the need to enhance your tech ecosystem at the same time. But you're right, Jo, there's some disconnects in that data. So it'd be interesting to unpack this report a bit more as we all get the full blow, yeah?
Well, that's right. And it is quite a lengthy report we have coming out later this week. Everyone online today will, you know, automatically receive a copy. There are many recommendations in there and many contributors. And look, you know, this is a wrap up for us. We're right on the hour. We're 30 seconds early. Look at us. Well done, panel. Thank you all so much for, you know, joining in and sharing and contributing and giving us some real talk, as many of our quotes did as well. And thank you to everyone joining us online and for getting involved. And of course, we'd love to see you all come and join us at ATC 2023. We are back at Luna Park 22-23 November. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.